Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Hope you tune in to Hannity tonight. I'm going to join Sean talking about our friend Charlie Kirk. Probably do it with Brian Kilmeade over the weekend. I'm checking in with some friends of Charlie today as well, including United States Senator Steve Daines from the great state of Montana. Senator, welcome. I'm glad you're available because I talked to John Cornyn. I caught up with Tom Cotton. I'd like to know what you thought about Charlie and his impact on the Republican Party and movement politics generally.
Hugh, this is one of those moments that come in life that are shocking, unexpected. I remember distinctly on Wednesday when the call came into our office from a couple of former colleagues of one of my staff members who were at that event in Utah. They were right in the front.
Oh,
So we knew about it literally within 2 or 3 minutes of Charlie being hit and going to the ground. And um, it was a reliable enough source. Of course, they were frantic. I had to go up to a hearing in the Senate, and I was sitting next to Mark Wayne Mullen, Senator Mullen, and I said, "There's news that Charlie's been shot." And we're just both shocked, and there was nothing at that point that was available on social media or any breaking news. And it hit me in a way, Hugh, that unlike anything I've really experienced in a long, long time, it was just profound. I called my wife. My children were engaged in this moment. They all had their pictures with Charlie. I can tell you, Charlie Kirk had a big influence on my life, on my wife's life, on my children's lives. I'm grateful our children are solid in their faith and their worldview and their politics. And I can tell you, it's leaders like Charlie Kirk who absolutely impacted our family. There was nobody quite like him. And when you see what he did on university campuses, and he'd been in Montana many times. In fact, some of his early starts were out here in the West. He was Foster Freeze in Wyoming, now Governor Greg Gianforte. But back then, my colleague in a software business, we were in the software together. Greg was one of those early supporters of Charlie as a teenager when nobody knew who Charlie Kirk was. So we just had an
yeah.
early insight into this guy, back when Charlie was not a household name. But the way he would go on university campuses and he would engage with I would call the Socratic teaching philosophy, which is asking questions of his adversaries versus telling them what to believe, was a really important part of Charlie's as a winsome warrior, confronting the radical ideologies that have just are so toxic on our university campus today. And Charlie was one of these bold, unafraid, humble, but as they called him, tender-hearted lion. That's Charlie Kirk. And I remember when I was campaigning with President Trump in the 24 election, when I was running the NRSC in this last cycle, making sure we got the majority back for Republicans, when people would ask me, they would say, how are we going to win the youth vote? How are we going to influence this next generation to embrace the ideals, the foundations of this great country called the United States of America? I always had a two-word answer, and it was Charlie Kirk.
Senator, you used the L word, and I'm glad you did. He's been called an influencer, he's been called a commentator. Charlie was a leader. And you also point out he grew this organically. I first met him in 2012 at the Western Conservative Summit when I was teaching for Bill Armstrong, a course to high school students. And Senator Armstrong said, "Can I roll in this kid, Charlie Kirk?" I said, "Sure." Give him the floor. And I was amazed. He had a lot of energy. But what impressed me, Senator, he kept learning. And Alan Estrin, you may know Alan, he co-founded Prager University, said to me last night, the real tragedy, the reason it hit so many people, is that he wasn't even at 50% of what he was going to become. He's already Rush Limbaugh big, but the trajectory was endless. He could have, I hope Turning Point endures and grows, but Charlie was the engine that built that, and it really did change the election in 2024.
No doubt about it, Hugh. I mean, when you think about the Charlie Kirk when he was just 18, 19, 20 years old, at that time he had the maturity of, let's say, somebody in their mid 30s. Then he gets into his early 30s at 31 years old. He had the maturity and the intellectual capacity of somebody you think more in maybe their 40s and 50s. And so this was a very, very unique individual. And you could see the maturation not only in the way he presented his case, frankly, through a lot of just trial and error over and over on the campuses, refining the way he engaged the radical left. But I also saw a deepening in his faith. He just became increasingly more anchored in his faith, which, despite the popularity and the success he experienced, I think that deepening of his faith, he never lost sight of who he served ultimately in his Savior, and it kept him humble and grounded. You saw that as a loving husband, an amazing father, those two sweet children. And at the end of the day, I always think that people only believe what they discover for themselves. And that's why Charlie was effective. He brought people who were opposed to his ideas through a process of self-discovery by using that Socratic teaching methodology. He helped them articulate what they really believed. And through that process, he was almost like an evangelist in terms of for conservative thinking, but also for faith. That intersection made him uniquely effective across campuses in the United States.
I can improve on that, Senator. I just point out that it's very remarkable for a young man to be known to as many people as he is known, especially the people who are leading the country, like you, Senator Daines, active in election. Charlie is really a unique human being and will be greatly missed. You also mentioned Foster Freeze. Completely different ends of the age spectrum, right? But both happy
Mm-hmm.
warriors. And we're
Mm-hmm.
blessed to have known them both and sorry to have lost them both in the last year. Senator Steve Daines, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me, Senator.
Thanks, Hugh.
So I will come in there and pick it up, Adam.